So let's move on to lecture guide number 7 then, and at least broach the subject of the Baroque period. So we're going back to Italy, and we're basically saying what happened after Mannerism, right? What happens after that little moment of time, La Maniera, in Italian painting. So the Baroque period is a historical period. It's not just an art style. It's about 150 years in which Europe gets very, very international. It enjoys an incredible, for the most part, an incredible kind of exuberant economy fueled by lots of wealth coming back from trade and exploration. You've got artists traveling from one city to the other, sharing ideas. You've got a lot of artists, especially where we're starting here in Italy, who are responding to the Protestant Reformation through what's known as Counter Reformation art, right? Counter Reformation is the Catholic response to the Protestant Reformation. And we see a big shift in art, especially from the Italian Renaissance to this time period. And so unlike the last one where I went through and I said, hey, here are all the stylistic, formal considerations to take into account with the Italian Renaissance, this time I want to make it a little bit more open. I want to talk about the style in terms of these 4 thematics, these 4 commonalities. Number 1, general tendencies in the Baroque period. Number 1, there's a greater interest in naturalism, or believable figures in believable spaces, rather than idealism. Naturalism actually becomes synonymous with truth or believability. So the more natural looking, the more convincing that it looks like a real situation, the more believable or truthful it'll be. Unlike in the Italian Renaissance, where we said the ideal is associated with truth. This, in turn, is closely tied to something that's going on in the context of the time, which is the rise of the empirical sciences, or what we will call the empirical sciences. Empirical sciences are sciences of observation. We look, we see phenomena, we test to see that something is repeatable. That's part of scientific investigation, looking very carefully. And so observing very carefully what things actually look like, how they actually operate, very closely associated with naturalism. Number 2, this will make more sense when I show you some of this art, but just like we saw in the Mannerist period, where artists are very clearly quoting other artists, we get a lot of that in the Baroque period. A very analytic approach to and careful consideration and reinterpretation of classical aesthetics. They don't get rid of classicism entirely. Even when they're being natural in their works, they'll oftentimes point to various classical aspects in their own art. This is, after all, again, I want to tie this to the context, the age of archaeological investigation. And by archaeological investigation, I mean we're starting to see the glimmers of people collecting works of art or digging up works of art and actually documenting where these things came from, what they're associated with, much more than just like pirating various burial sites and so forth. Number 3, a real interest in human emotion, even psychology. In the Renaissance, everyone's interested in rationality, don't really pay any attention or not very much to emotionality. The Baroque period is about theatrical, emotional works of art, both in terms of what you see in the pictures and in terms of the way they're supposed to impact you. They're supposed to make you feel rather than make you think. Number 4, a careful consideration and manipulation of the position of the viewer. In the Renaissance, works of art are almost always premised on the idea that you're looking through a window onto a more perfect world. In the Baroque period, they will try to include you in the scene. They'll make the space of the painting and the sculpture coextensive with your space. And that's very tied to number 3, right? If you feel like you're in the scene itself, you're going to feel more active and impacted than if you're just looking at it from afar. So we start with the major artists of this time period, Caravaggio, Michelangelo Merisi, but known as Caravaggio. Caravaggio actually spent a lot of time in Rome working as a little bit of a lesser artist. His first gig when he moved to Rome was to paint fruit and still life in compositions of larger works of art, and then he broke off with his own fairly secret clientele, I should say, creating works like this. Caravaggio seems to have cultivated a group of people that surrounded one of the major cardinals of the time, someone who did a lot of artistic commissions, the Cardinal del Monte, who seems very clearly to have been a gay man. And again, remember, if you're thinking, oh my God, how could this be? Catholic Church, don't they have these rules against this? Of course they do, but again, people turn blind eyes to these things all the time. There have been gay people around since the beginning of the universe. And so even though I think probably a lot of people knew about this, they didn't say anything about it. And Caravaggio started painting scenes like this, young Bacchus, that seem very much about kind of homoerotic imagery. And what I mean by that is, this is not Bacchus, the god of wine, or if it is, it's rather a young, beautiful Italian boy playing the role of Bacchus, the god of wine. And he's offering us some wine here, but very provocatively, he seems to be offering us a little bit more. He's untied his gown here, looking at us, surmising us. Everything about this makes him look like a model rather than some real god. He hasn't been idealized. He's got this kind of farmer's tan thing going on as well. He's supposed to look like some young man who's here for entertaining purposes. In the foreground, this fruit basket, which again, as I said, Caravaggio, this was his job for a long time, to create these in larger compositions, is so carefully painted that you can see everything in here, of course, and most of the fruit is just past the point of being ripe, right? It's starting to rot. There's some decadence here, and that's a common symbol in still life paintings at large, and maybe a reference to the idea of the decadence of this pleasure, that things are overly, in this case, sexually provocative. The works that we're going to focus on, though, are the works that he got after these early commissions that are big religious commissions, and this is probably the most important of these. So this is a work that's usually referred to as the entombment. It's clearly an entombment. And I just want you to spend some time thinking about the 4 tendencies that we expect in the Baroque and try to find those here. So take me through it. Obviously, we know Christ. That's Christ here. Who is this? Very close to Christ, right? The youngest person in an entombment scene, it's always going to be whom? Johnny E. John the Evangelist, right? Then we go up here, and who's this? Mary. Mary the Virgin. Then we go up here, crying. Mary Magdalene. Good, because crying at his feet, washing his feet off, and then nondescript Mary. You don't need to remember her, right? So turning this over to you. Go find those 4 tendencies in the Baroque period in this work. Turn to your neighbors and share your thoughts. So let's start with number one. What do you see here that's more naturalistic than what you would expect to find south or in Italy during the Italian Renaissance proper? Yeah.
Mary looks old.
Okay, Mary looks old for once. Mary should be old. Christ is 34, she was 14, she should be 48 at least. Right? And she looks her age. It's something that in a way the Italians have adopted from what they saw over there in the north, right? This works. If people can identify or relate to these religious figures, it's something that is a beacon call for them to come back to the Catholic Church, right? I understand, I relate. What else is natural? Yeah. Okay, so we see veins, but let's go even further than that. I see veins all over Michelangelo's work. What are those veins telling us about Nicodemus's legs? I should have said that. That's Nicodemus again. He's in a lot of Michelangelo's works, yeah? Okay, he's under strain. That is a big dude, right? That body weighs a lot. You ever carried around a dead body? Heavy, right? So here he is straining about that body. All those veins are showing us lots of weight there. What else? What else is naturalistic? That's a nice body, but is that a Michelangelo body? No. Can you tell any proportionality here? Probably not, right? They're all kind of different types. Okay, let's go on to number 3. Emotionality, psychology. Where do you see it? Yep. Oh my God, right? And all of them have some different type of emotion. Right? They're not all placidly just, do you remember those Renaissance works? They could be the most horrible scene ever and people are like, yeah, ho-hum. And here it's like, how could this be happening? Quiet, crying over here, contemplation. John's just plain shocked. And by the way, he should be, not just because Christ is dead, but follow his arm. Where is his arm going, his hand? Right in that cut in his side. His fingers are going into the gash in Christ's side. Gross, right? It's supposed to pick up the emotional quality to this whole thing. But beyond that, not just the faces here, what is our composition? Is this a horizontal, vertical, is it a pyramidal form? Not really. It's like this starts up here and then slowly, one after another, diagonal kind of falling down this way. And all those diagonals add movement, don't they? And they add this feeling too, like they might drop him. That's going to freak people out. And then in the crucifixion, they drop Christ, right? It's like, no, that's not in there. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But all that movement. And in addition to that, this kind of lighting scheme, is that rational? Where does the light source come from? And the answer is wherever the hell Caravaggio wants it to hit. It's like a spotlight on this, and it's got its own name, and you have to know this. It's called tenebrism, Tenebrism. And once he puts this out there, everyone starts borrowing it, because it's very dramatic, isn't it? Spotlight effect, high contrast, like a dramatic scene. And those colors, darks, whites, red, bam, 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 right? Sharp colors, intense red. Big contrast, all emotional. Let's go one step further before I let you out of here. How about the way it includes you in the scene as a viewer, right? Where are you? Yeah.
Well, it's almost like Nicodemus is like looking at you for help.
Okay, looking at us out here, and where are we? What is this? That's good. Yeah, he's triangulated you in, but what is this? This is the tombstone. There's the tomb. You're down in the tomb. Crappy job, by the way. Down in the tomb, here comes Christ. They might drop him on your head. Right? It includes you in the scene. You are there. Not a silent witness, viewing it from afar, protected by your voyeuristic kind of viewing dynamic. You are actually a part of this. That's going to up the emotional quality of this whole thing. The final thing that I want to say is if that body's looking familiar to you again, it's because he's quoting his namesake, Michelangelo Buonarroti. He's quoting the Pietà again. He's interpreting that in a different direction. Again, Right after the Pietà, right at that moment, now we entomb Christ. Okay. All right, so we left off last time. We had just broached the Baroque period, and we really looked at the style and talked very briefly about the context here. And we spent a lot of time on this work, which is Caravaggio's entombment work. So I want to go back over a couple of things here just to make sure we have this under our belt, right? So the Baroque period is the period that follows La Maniera and the Renaissance. It is an international style. It's going to show up in different iterations, meaning looking slightly different in different parts of the world, but some of the key components will remain constant. So one of the things to wrap your mind around is why this style was so important at the time, and it has a lot to do with the Catholic Counter Reformation's need for a style of art that was provocative, that was entertaining, believe it or not, to some degree, one that could bring people back into the fold, one that people would look at this art and not have to, let's say, think like you might in a Renaissance work of art about Neoplatonic theory and deep intellectual ideas that you may not have ever come into contact with, but rather something that had a mass popular appeal, something that, think of it as modern entertainment in a way, very, very theatrical, very, very democratic in the sense that you can look at it and make sense of almost everything that is in these paintings and sculptures without knowing a lot of esoteric knowledge about them. Relatable, right? You can look at these and say, oh, these characters are like me. This is what they went through. And then all of that high drama that will catch you up in them and make you feel like you're a part of that scene and make this all the more important to you. The Counter-Reformation, of course, is the Catholic response to the Protestant Reformation. And they're basically fighting for the flocks, right? They're fighting for people. They're saying, hey, up there in the north, a couple of these ideas have really worked well. We saw those in the Northern Renaissance, right? Relatability, setting scenes of religious subjects in a contemporary setting, and on and on and on. Let's take a couple of those back and associate it also with high drama and theatricality, which again will hopefully bring people back into the fold. The more specific context for this work is important. It was created for the congregation of the oratory. It's a term on your handout. I expect to see it the midterm if this question is asked, right? Congregation of the Oratory was a huge Catholic church that was founded by a Counter-Reformation mystic by the name of Saint Philip Neri, or sometimes he's called Saint Philip of Neri. Now, this man had already died, but he was an incredibly successful priest and preacher. He was very much mystical, too, and mysticism in Catholicism at this time is pretty tricky, and we'll see it come up again. It simply means that someone believes that they have some kind of direct pathway to God, like that God or one of the saints has spoken to them directly. And it's something that a lot of Catholics at this time are pretty worried about, because the Protestants are saying something kind of similar, right? You can have a direct pathway to God. Catholics still want to keep that hierarchy in play. So when you have someone who is a mystic who is accepted, you have to think, whoa, this person must have been really special. And he was. He had a huge gathering, huge flock. People are still going to this church well after. And the commission to Caravaggio was, use some of the same tactics this man used in his sermons, including things like high theatrical approaches, making people think about these topics in very relatable terms and so forth. The other thing that is very specific about this is I left you last time by saying, hey, remember, where are you situated? This is a big part of the Baroque period. It tries to include you in the scene. And what does it mean that they crammed you in the tomb here as the viewer? In its original iteration, in situ, as they say, where it was actually created for, it worked like this. This was the altar. This huge work was right behind the altar. So imagine the priests up here, and they're doing things at Mass, very important rituals, including the ritual of the Holy Communion. The Holy Communion, remember, is changing the wine into the blood and the bread into the body. I know this seems really esoteric, and it is, but Protestants believe even today that when Mass occurs in a church, that bread isn't really turned into the body of Christ, nor is the wine turned into the blood. It's all commemorative. The original, as they call it, transubstantiation, in which this occurred, only occurred at the Last Supper. However, Catholics think that transubstantiation, the actual turning of the wine into the blood and the bread into the body, does occur during Mass. And by setting it up this way so that the body of Christ is being laid down on the altar, that's the specifics of this, they're emphasizing that difference with Protestantism. They're saying this is the body of Christ here. Then they, hand out the Holy Communion and so forth. Some other specifics in here. These are little simple symbolisms. You see that corner of the tombstone, which, by the way, also juts out into our space, it breaks that picture plane, includes us in the scene. It's also symbolic. It's meant to say, again, for Catholics, Christ is the cornerstone of the church, which is a fancy way of saying, remember, St. Peter was given the keys by Christ himself. The Catholic Church is the only one that legitimately has a connection to Christ. Those Protestants are out there doing their own wacky thing without any legitimacy. That's what they're saying at the time. Find a little symbol here. You can probably barely see it, but that's a fern. And more often than not, when you see something green, particularly something that's an evergreen, meaning it comes back year after year, like a fern would, that is a symbol of the resurrection, that Christ is dead now, but he will be reborn just as these perennial ferns never quite die, right? So again, getting up close on this, nondescript Mary off to the side, all of these figures, different types of emotions, right? Very, very theatrical. Next to her, a quiet-looking Mary Magdalene. And next to that, surprisingly, because we don't see this, an older-looking Virgin Mary here. And then John the Evangelist, of course, in his own extreme. This figure here that we haven't really talked about a lot, that's Nicodemus. Nicodemus showed up before in Michelangelo's Pietà, the second one. And it's used again here by basically his namesake. Caravaggio's name is Michelangelo Merisi. He was actually named after Michelangelo Buonarroti. And he's doing something that, again, artists do all the time in the Baroque period. He's quoting an earlier master by including Nicodemus here and putting his own face on Nicodemus, although an elderly face. So one more of these. Right? This is the death of the Virgin. What I'd like you to do is just for a minute, imagine that this, and it won't happen this way, but imagine that this goes up on the quiz, and I haven't even talked about it, but I say, hey, tell me why this work is Baroque. Can you tell me why this work is Baroque? Those 4 general characteristics. Turn to your nearest neighbor and share your thoughts. All right, who can help me out a little bit here? Is this useful? I mean, it gives me a break from talking. I like to use it as a way for you to take a minute to kind of assess where you are, see if you have any questions, interact with your peers. I know it's a big class, so discussion isn't really conducive here, but is this useful for me to pause every once in a while and say, hey, take a couple minutes, talk about this? Is everyone on board with that? Okay. So who can help me out here? What's one thing that comes across to you and you're like, this it couldn't possibly be a Renaissance picture? Yeah? Okay, so we have some pretty strong emotions, including something that you don't see in the Renaissance very often, grown men crying, right? These are the apostles who have come back to witness the death of the Virgin Mary, and, you know, they're crying, sobbing at this, including Mary Magdalene in the foreground and so forth. Good. What else? Right in the center. Shout it.
The very dramatic lighting.
Very dramatic lighting, which is called what? Tenebrism or Caravagism. So make sure you have that term down. Again, I'll be using the terms that I expect you to use in the, boy, that's annoying. I'll be using the terms that I expect you to be using on your exams all the time. You don't want to spend a lot of time having to explain something. So if you can say tenebrism or dramatic lighting, also known as tenebrism, I'll know exactly what you mean, and that's important. What else? Yep.
Like the position of the viewer, it looks like we're a part of the circle.
Good. So it spills out into your space, right? It breaks the picture plane. You're in that scene. It doesn't set up an imaginary barrier. Most works, if you go back and look at those Renaissance works, it'll give space to you there, but there's a break, right? You're over here, break, and then these things are happening almost as if they're on a stage. How about this one? Death of the Virgin. What have we been calling this? The Assumption of the Virgin, right? So the Assumption, she didn't even have to go through death. She's so important. They just assume her, drag her up into heaven right at her death. No, he's saying this is the death, and it is a literal death, isn't it? A real, relatable event. And then you look at the body, and I know this is tough to kind of see, but that body looks more like a dead body than what we've seen before. I mean, she's incredibly pale. She's still very old. Her feet are kind of dirty. Her abdomen looks a little bit bloated. And this was a huge criticism of this work. This freaked people out. They looked at this and they said, I know what you're doing. This follows all these rules of the Baroque period. It's very dramatic. It's very emotional. We can connect to an actual death of the Virgin Mary. She looks dead. It's going to pull all that emotion out of us. You included us in the scene. But is this appropriate for a representation of this most beloved woman of all time, particularly in Italy? I mean, I'm sorry. How many people have been to Italy before? You got into anyone's home in Italy? You notice a lot of Madonnas around all over the place. Always have been. They thought, is this how we treat her? We're going to show her looking bloated and actually dead? And then, and probably true, a rumor floated around about who his model was. Caravaggio liked to get things accurate. So he would use live models all the time, and he probably used dead models. So in this case, story had it that a prostitute was fished out of the river, and he used her as the model for the Virgin Mary of a recently deceased body. How do you think they felt about that idea? Wait a minute, you're using a prostitute, an actual dead person, some lower class as the model for the Virgin Mary? Not appropriate. What I'm trying to get at is these things catch on, right? Caravaggio has a massive impact on all the art that comes after, but there were as many detractors as there were supporters early on. And I'm just going to go through a few of these quickly so we don't get too far behind. This is the conversion of St. Paul. We haven't seen this subject before, but the conversion of St. Paul is based upon an Old Testament biblical tale in which Saul, as he's originally known, is traveling to persecute Christians in Damascus. And he is struck from his horse by his conversion. God has converted him to his own cause. Now, conversion scenes in the Baroque period are really, really popular because on both sides they push the idea that conversion or let's say, any person can be saved by God's grace. So for the Protestants, they like to point to it and say, hey, those Catholics who kept telling you that indulgences were the way to go, and they had a pocket full of grace, aren't paying attention to conversion scenes where this guy's just a horrible person and yet somehow God chooses him. And then Catholics come along and say something like, yeah, okay, but what we're really getting at is the idea that anyone, despite what they've done in life, has the possibility of divine redemption, and we're in the business of kind of making sure that happens. In any case, they get very, very popular. Most of the time that you see the conversion of St. Paul, he's just riding on a horse. There's usually a mountain range behind him, and you see a light coming through the clouds, and he's looking at it. And maybe there's a glowing nimbus around him. Nothing very theatrical. This one, though, look at it. I mean, he's been knocked down off of that horse. You have this incredibly, tenebristic lighting in the situation. The entire frame, where he's just, coming out of the frame at all levels, or this horse gets right up into the edge of the frame, makes us feel that we're really in tight on this as viewers. We're actually in this scene with him. You can't probably see this from where you are, but his eyes are rolled up in the back of his head, right? He's lying prostrate on the ground, eyes rolled up in his head. That's conversion. That's a very theatrical conversion, right? He has been struck by the light of God. So much so that these things that are meant to be dangerous, look at the horse's hoof up here. He's just lying there. I mean, most men are going to be like, dude, cover yourself up a little bit here so things can go horribly wrong. That's in there on purpose. That's supposed to make you feel all of the tension that's going on here. Or this one, the Crucifixion of St. Peter. Again, just going through, giving you some more interesting ideas. Look at how over and over again in Baroque works of art, we have competing diagonals everywhere, so that the entire compositional device is this crucifix that's on its side. The story of St. Peter, of course, is that when he was crucified, he believed that he wasn't as good as Jesus and so didn't deserve to be crucified in the same way, and so he asked that he be crucified upside down, which I think is going above and beyond, frankly, but that's what he decided to do. So you see him there, big diagonal through this thing, lots of things breaking the plane, the picture plane here coming into our space, another diagonal going this way. And of course, in all of these, an implied movement that is nowhere to be found in most Renaissance works of art, right? Everything's at one moment in time turning into the next moment in time, whereas a Renaissance work looks like I've just picked this one key moment, we're just going to go with that, that's going to stand in for everything that's involved in this. So again, a lot of theatrical subjects, including this famous one, get popular in the Baroque period. This is a work that is called it's called Judith and Holofernes. It's an Old Testament subject that is basically talked about in the Apocrypha. So it's not a part of the specific Bible, or at least not all aspects of it are part of the Bible itself. It's part of the Apocrypha that you've now read about a number of times, that are all the stories that help to explain the key components of the Bible and were accepted as biblical tales. In this one, what happens is that Judith is an Israelite, so she's a Jewish woman. And the Jews in this case are beset by Holofernes, who I off the top of my head, I forget, I think he might be an Assyrian. Doesn't really matter. Is that correct? Yeah. And so they're not going to win this. It's looking pretty bad for them. And in one of the few moments in which you have a woman hero in the history of Christianity or Judeo-Christian texts, and in representations in art, she takes it upon herself to help tip the tide in the favor of the Israelites. And she does this, according to the Apocrypha, by sneaking into the camp of Holofernes and promising him something. Some of the Apocrypha say she's a very, very beautiful woman and she seduces him with her beauty. Others focus on the fact that she was a Jewish woman with a lot of wealth and she may have seduced him that way. There's always an indication that the seduction of being a traitor and turning over something that will tip the tides in the favor of Holofernes is involved. In any case, what she ends up doing is seducing him somehow, depending on how the story is told. And in the middle of the night, while he's sleeping, she, with the help of her maidservant, cuts his head off, sticks it in a bag, goes back to the camp of the Israelites so that the next morning, as the Assyrians are poised to destroy them, they just take the head out of the bag and kind of wave it back and forth at the Assyrians, and they all run the other way, going, holy crap, this Judaic God is much more powerful than we thought. We can't fight this. We're out of here, kind of thing. So I want to emphasize a couple things here. Number one, we have, maybe for the first time in our class anyway, a woman as a hero, a woman who is actively doing something to change the world, right? To change the lot of the Israelites. She's not just passive. She's not just there for her appearance, right? She's doing something. And this should strike us all as like, wow, that's a thing to remark on. Doesn't happen that often. The other thing, though, that I want you to think about is how this artist represents this subject according to what was considered to be the norms, particularly gender norms, of his own age. How those influenced how he represents this. Hopefully the Baroque stuff's pretty clear, right? We've got tenebrism again. We've got obvious kind of theatricality. We've got, spurting blood, for crying out loud, coming out in our space. I mean, typical kind of Baroque stuff. But what if I ask you this question? On the right-hand side here is a work by Artemisia Genoleski, who is the artist we'll be covering next. Her father was a follower of Caravaggio. There were so many of these, they called them Caravaggisti, right? People who were followers of Caravaggio because he got so popular. And she went at this subject of Judas slaying Holofernes in a slightly different way. And I wonder, and I know it's not entirely appropriate to say this because there are a whole host of other factors that are involved, but just as a thought experiment, think a little bit about how a woman represents this subject on the right and a man represents this subject on the left, looking for differences and asking, what do those differences mean? So turn to your nearest couple of neighbors and just note what the differences are, and then speculate, because as I said, it's not this simple. Hey, could it have made a difference that a woman is thinking her way through this subject and saying, wait a minute, I want to represent it this way? You're fine. You're fine. Baroque works don't like a lot of light. So again, this is primarily what we're up to in this class at a kind of introductory level to art history. We're asking questions about how do the visual forms of these works of art differ? What are some of the ways we might think about why they differ? How do they communicate these messages differently, and so forth? So what's one big difference between these two? Yeah.
How active the guy is in either one. In Caravaggio's, he has a much more energetic and almost more active stance than the other one.
Okay, so we've got she's pointing out the differences between the man in each. The man on the left looks active, getting up out of bed, only to find that, his head's almost severed off. The other one looks like well, he's been pinned down. He's not doing much to fight back. Now, I want to focus on something here. Which one seems more threatening to men, right? Which one is going to be more disturbing to men to see? We've got a very powerful looking man over here, and he's just woken up to find his head's gone. But in a way, he's not being overpowered. It's all happened kind of at once. I find this one much more threatening, that you're pinned down, that you've lost all of your power, that, slowly but surely, that head's coming off. Which leads me to the next one. How many people have carved a steak before or something? I mean, I'm not going to ask you, how many people here have decapitated something? Right? I don't want to know. Keep it to yourself. But how many people know that cutting through a neck and a vertebrae like this, probably unlikely? Because how much time has passed here exactly? Not a lot. Blood's just spurting out, and we're almost all the way through. And you probably know that cutting like this, not probably the best way to put some pressure on it, right? So she just stuck that knife out, started cutting the neck. She's almost all the way through it. All going very well for her. Whereas over here, how long has that been going on, right? A bit of time. We've got different hues of red for the blood, some that's much darker, some that's much lighter. It's still, spurting blood out. How many people, again, speaking of it, Game of Thrones last night, right? I mean, sorry, it's all on my mind. I'm just like, I can't get away from violence today, but here it is, right? Here we go. What's the difference between that? What does that emphasize about the heroic act of the woman? I'm going to see where you go with this. How heroic is it for you to stick your knife out and just like touch a neck and it's like, versus, got to get to work. You climb on top of her. I'm going to go here. Right? It's different, isn't it? Question is, in a way, who's guiding that knife over there on the left-hand side? Is it her? Or is she just an emissary for her God? I mean, it's really not emphasizing much about her act here versus Artemisia Genoleski, the woman artist, saying, wait a minute, if you had to cut a head off, it's going to take some work, and maybe this is how it would go down. Let's go one more step. How about her? What is emphasized about how do you think she got into the camp? I mean, what are we emphasizing? She's pretty, right? And she's made to look even more pretty and youthful by sticking her next to her maidservant, who is an old crone. Sorry, she's meant to be, right? You can even hear her cackling, can't you? I mean, you put that juxtaposition and you're like, wow, really pretty. Not so much so, right? And then you go over to this one, and it's not that she's not pretty, but by the contemporary standards, do you think there's anything being done to really emphasize her prettiness? I don't see it. And so the question then is like, okay, well, how'd she get in? Well, maybe not so much through her prettiness. Maybe it has to do with wealth. Not entirely sure, but it doesn't rest upon that very standard narrative that a woman's power is all based upon their appearance, which we get in the other one. How about their response to blood? What's this one's attitude here? She's doing this, right? Ugh, yuck, blood. Which, by the way, is entirely appropriate. That's how everyone thought of women at the time. It's against their very nature to be violent. Therefore, this woman faced with, performing a heroic act should be a little bit disturbed by what's occurring. Versus over here, I can't tell if she's worried about it at all. Like, whatever, got to get a job done. Right? So you see how these things start adding up a little bit. You can say something like, by the standards of the day, it makes total sense that Caravaggio would rest on the idea that a woman's power comes from her beauty. That's how she got in here. That's how she seduced him. That she's not really the heroine that you see in Artemisia Genoleski's, in that her hand seems to be guided by God that it can cut through that neck so quickly, and that she's rightly, for a woman, disturbed by this. Whereas Artemisia Genoleski seems a lot more forward-looking. What if a woman really did do this? How would this go down? It's not that, God's not involved in this, but he's not the major actor in this. It's not about her prettiness that got her in there, all of those things, right? And she went at this subject over and over again. Artemisia Genoleski, typically, like most women artists through history, came from a family of artists, as I said. But what I haven't emphasized is a couple of things that are really difficult for women. One is that I think I've mentioned this before with the Mannerist artists. Women weren't really allowed to paint live male nudes in particular. It was even questionable whether they were supposed to be painting female nudes. They could draw from statuary. But that's not the same thing, right? Imagine going to art school and having your professor say, this is a class for men, right? You can't learn all this stuff. It would be useful to you, but no, it's not appropriate for a woman to see a nude man, even though the paintings all have nudity around them. Makes it very difficult. I also mentioned, though, that artist studios are not a particularly safe place for young women, or frankly for anyone. They're not always above boards. Artemisia Genoleski was actually sexually assaulted in her father's studio. She was raped, and it was so well known that this occurred because the man who raped her was actually a fellow painter, and she was forced to continue the relationship with him because once he raped her, they were supposed to get married. She was damaged goods, so to speak. And then he reneged on that and jumped town, and they basically sued him in front of a magistrate. This became very public knowledge, and I bring all of this up for two reasons. One, to say it really was a dire circumstance for women to become artists. It was a difficult thing to do. And number two, for Artemisia Genoleski in particular, the way to understand this is, I think, very clearly that once this became common knowledge for the public, that people kind of let her off the hook for things that they might have held against other women artists, including creating these very, very violent scenes of Judith and Holofernes. In other words, they said, well, cut her some slack in a way that wouldn't have occurred for other artists. So this is just another one of these subjects. In this case, you see the head down here below, and Judith and her maidservant making their way out of the camp. This is Artemisia Genoleski herself in a work called La Pittura, her self-portrait. I think it's a little telling that some of the figures that are in a lot of her works look suspiciously like her, especially the same body type, which isn't uncommon for artists to use their own bodies as models for their works of art. In this case, she's doing something a lot of artists do, showing herself in the process of painting. Painting on this brick red field, which for those of you who don't know is very common at the time. You don't start painting on white, you paint on brick red so that in some cases, so that the light that passes through the oil painting reflects off that and gives you a nice warm glow to a human figure in particular. She also has this symbol of artistry around her neck. It's a chain with all of these links symbolizing her connection to artists of the past. Each link is an artist from the past that she is drawing from, right? She's the product of a long history of artistry. And the little mask that's at the end of this is mimesis. It's the highest form of artistic creation, something that mimics, divine reality. Again, I want to turn this over to you for a minute here. This is another very popular subject that I haven't shown you before called Susanna and the Elders. And it's a subject that artists have painted a billion times by this point. Probably not that many, but a lot. And more often than not, the way that they paint it is in a manner in which, you get a work like this, Susanna and the Elders, and you're not entirely sure that painting isn't just created to give the same pleasure that it's supposedly condemning. In other words, it's another one of those double articulations. It says one thing, don't do this, don't treat women this way, but on the other hand, it seems to be all about that. So the story of Susanna and the Elders is one in which Susanna, who is married, is a beautiful young Jewish woman, is going to her bath, and a couple of creepy old elders from the town who have all the power are spying on her and then decide that they're going to try to extort sex from her by approaching her and saying, listen, if you don't have sex with us, we're going to tell everyone we saw you in an adulterous situation with another man. You'll be stoned to death for this, by the way, according to the rules of the Old Testament. And so you better have sex with us. And she says, not going to do it. And she's not going to do it because she can't lie and she can't break faith with her husband. And she'd rather die for that than break these cardinal rules. As the story progresses, they, of course, tell on her. She is right on the verge of being killed for adultery when Daniel shows up. If you're wondering why Daniel is the patron saint of lawyers, this is why. He cross-examines the two elders and figures out that basically their stories are inconsistent. Where they say that this took place is not the same tree in each situation. The whole, accusation falls apart. But at this point, all we're looking at is the moment of the extortion of Susanna. And again, I want you to see the way that male artists had done this before. So look over here. There's creepy elder number 1. There's creepy elder number 2. But if you don't see them, or you don't really know what the story is, what do you think you're looking at here? And the answer is a provocative picture of a nude woman who's got, a little bit of a crotch shot here, lots of reflection of this body, who seems completely unaware that anything bad's going to happen. Or, by the way, that was Tintoretto. You remember him from the Last Supper. This weird French one, I mean, again, spend a moment looking at this. Are we sure that she is threatened in any way? I mean, not very clear, is it? And you've got creepy dude number 1, super creepy dude number 2, hands going up in between thighs. This is supposed to be her beset by this sexual assault, and you look at it and you're kind of like, she doesn't seem all that worried about it, which is problematic to say the least, right? But then when a woman goes at it, how is this different? Turn to your neighbors and tell each other what you think. So I think the biggest thing that I'm sure most of you are noticing is that, remember, we've been using this designation naked and nude. And it's not the perfect designation, but what it's trying to do is draw our attention to the way that women have been objectified in the history of visual representation, and the few instances where there are places in which you see something where a woman actually seems to have her own feelings and thoughts. And in this one, right, you can see the impact of this attempt to extort sex from her on her face itself, whereas over here, not so clear, right? Object, subject. Nude, naked, in other words. You have to look at this and say, oh, if I acted that way, it will have an impact on another human being. A horrible impact. Then go beyond that. Look at the violent twist of the neck away from this proposition. Look at this very strong hovering mass over top of her, pushing her down. Two men conspiring, two men of power. Versus over here, whatever. Could care less about what's going on there. Then you look at this body itself. That body itself is supposed to be highlit so that you see its sexual provocativeness. You're supposed to be able to see, a shot of the breast. She covers up most of the rest. But again, for this age, this is quite provocative. And the reason you want to highlight that body is to say, yes, this might be something that you covet. This might be something that you lust for, but don't act this way. Whereas over here, it's like, this might be something you covet. This might be something you lust for. And whatever, do whatever you want. So Baroque illusionistic ceiling frescoes now. That's pretty cool stuff. It loses a lot when you're looking at it in a classroom. But if you get to Europe, and you, especially in Italy, you see some of these things, they'll kind of blow you away. They're amazing. They're basically a continuation of some of the things that we saw in Correggio's own work and an intensification of the idea that you as the viewer are included in the scene. I want to start us off with a very, very simple one that's not very exciting in my opinion. This is a work by Guido Reni called Aurora, and the subject is basically the dawn. Aurora is the dawn, who's being led in, this is dawn, led in by Apollo on his sun chariot along with these kind of lesser goddesses of Apollo's retinue. This is a painting that would be created for basically a summer home or kind of your country home, and set oftentimes in atriums to announce kind of the coming, summer days and so forth. And the real reason I bring this in is to say, yeah, there are things about this that are Baroque. Notice how it's kind of asymmetrical, that everything's in movement going off this way, that the figures twist and turn away from the picture plane, that we have a little bit more intense colors and so forth. But the bigger thing that I want you to know is what this terminology is that gets associated with Baroque illusionistic ceiling frescoes. So this will be on the ceiling, and it's done in a process just like Michelangelo would, called quadroriportato. It's a term on your handout. It just means 4/4 transfer. And what you basically do is you paint a scene as if you would look at it on a wall this way, and then you put it on the ceiling like that, right? So its perspective is not changed at all from an orientation on a wall. As these painters get more and more complex, they start figuring out ways to create scenes from a perspective that's down on the floor, usually initially in the middle of the room in which you're in which the perspective is generated by you down below, up above. And so here's the exact same subject, Aurora, by Guercino. And by the way, both of these are on a barrel vaulted ceiling. So a ceiling that kind of bends up away from you on a long series of Roman arches, right? Simple, this one's much more complex. The technique on this is called di sotto in su, or up from under. Di sotto in su. And in this case, it's a little like those anamorphic chalk drawings you can see on the sidewalk, where when you look at it from straight on, it looks like a hole in the ground or whatever it is, a building. Has everyone seen these? They're kind of remarkable. Right on, it looks like, wow, the most hyper-illusionistic thing you've ever seen. And then you step around the side and that thing is just spilled out over 10 feet or so and doesn't look accurate at all, because the artist has used these techniques in order to fool you into believing what you're seeing is hyper-illusionistic. In this case, all of this architecture is painted in very high trompe-l'oeil, so fool the eye architecture, as if you're looking up through buildings into the sky and you're seeing Apollo slightly from below, you're seeing these horses slightly from below. And as you move through the space, because the perspective is set up for one particular viewpoint, it looks like a weird surrealist work. In other words, this is it just walking into the room. And it looks totally weird and distorted and everything until you get in the middle of the room, and then it looks correct. And they just keep getting more and more complex. This is a work that's called The Triumph of the Barbarini. And we're just going to go over this fairly quickly. This is by Pietro da Cortona. The Barbarini family, a big, powerful Italian family, have been popes and cardinals for a long time. And in this case, everything that you see here is on a barrel vaulted ceiling. Everything that you see here is either painted in grisaille to look like sculpture or actual figures. And it's all got this kind of systematic program about extolling all the high virtues of this family, including things like, you don't need to remember this, by the way, but this is divine immortality over here. This is Providence, who is pointing to the family. This is the family's crest over here with Roman gods in it and so forth. All super hyper-illusionistic. as if you're looking through a skylight into the sky, and all these figures are kind of moving around into your own space and down the walls. This is Time, for instance, Father Time. The one that I want you to remember as an example of Baroque illusionistic ceiling frescoes is this one. This is called Triumph in the Name of Jesus. It's basically a Last Judgment scene, and it's in the Jesuit flagship church in Rome, Il Gesù. The Jesuit order, as I said before, had been created by Ignatius Loyola, partially to protect the Pope from the theological attacks that were occurring by the Protestants. A very, very scholarly arm, and of course, very interested in proselytizing and converting people at this time period. Their church is a beautiful, beautiful Baroque church, and in the main kind of entryway is this beautiful fresco painting in which you see a kind of Last Judgment scene. Now, what's so remarkable about this, and the general term for this type of incredibly illusionistic ceiling fresco is quadratura, which in this case mixes together what you just saw in De Soto and Su with actual stucco sculptures, is that, again, this is all architecture. Then you have this thing that looks like a skylight that's actually where all the fresco painting is painted, looking up into this swirling vortex of light, which is Jesus up above. But they don't show you Jesus. They just put his initials, IHS. And the reason for that is that, remember, the Protestants said, you're not supposed to represent God. It's against the Bible. And they're taking that to heart. They're saying, okay, we'll just represent the idea of God rather than a human likeness. In previous scenes of Last Judgment or Assumption scenes and so forth, heaven, of course, everyone's being pulled up there, and then there's a lower register where you've got hell. Think of Michelangelo's Last Judgment scene, for instance. But in this one, what happens is that all of these elect in the circle of light are being drawn up there, and other figures, these are all being cast out. These are the sinners coming down into your space. And where this gets really interesting is that these figures are all, by the time they get on the outside of this, they're all stucco. They're actual three-dimensional figures that have been painted to look totally real. I mean, I don't know how else to explain this than to say, think of the most intense, like 3D experience you ever had at IMAX. This is their version of that. And it's done for a very particular reason, right? The Last Judgment could happen at any moment. What is the state of your soul? When you walk into the space, that's what it's meant to make you think. What if it happened right now? This is as illusionistic, as realistic as you can get it. How would that make you feel? I mean, the illusion goes so far that these clouds, for instance, cast shadows on the ceiling itself. See these cast shadows? The light source being Jesus up here, that's not real light, right? That's painted light, just as these shadows are painted shadows. They're just varnish on the surface of the actual architecture to trick you into believing you're actually witnessing this scene. Very, very cool. If you get to Rome, see it. And the man who helped with the stucco sculptures on this is the most important Italian Baroque sculptor, Giovanni Bernini, or Gian Lorenzo Bernini here. So I'm using this, even though I don't have enough images to really make this work for us, in order to talk to you about how, of course, in sculpture, some of the things we've been watching in painting in the Baroque period are used as well, but it's a little bit more complex to do it. And I said before, for the most part, when you see a Renaissance work of art, they have one particular point of view that they say, this is the best point of view. Look at me from here. You can walk around them, but really it's like, this is the vantage point that I expected people to see the sculpture from. And in Baroque works, they do that far less. Their sculptures are things to be looked at from all angles, and they change in accordance with all of those angles. And this is a great example. This is a work called Apollo and Daphne. And I brought it in so that you're looking at it from the rear on purpose. The story is essential here. Apollo is basically a good guy. He's nothing like Zeus. Very few times that he does anything that he can be, that anyone would think are contestable. In this case, though, Cupid's having a little game with him, and he shoots Apollo with one of his arrows that inflames his lust, and then he shoots Daphne, who is a virgin, with these other arrows that sometimes he has in Greek mythology that completely makes her not want any attention from Apollo whatsoever. It's like the opposite of those lustful arrows. And then he just sits back and sees what happens. And what happens is that Apollo chases Daphne. Daphne tries to, get away from him. And finally, just as Apollo is going to capture Daphne, she calls out to her father, who turns her into a laurel tree. Some saving, Dad. Thanks a lot. In any case, here we go. It's a story that's all about a chase. And how do you deal with that if you're dealing with a static thing like sculpture? I mean, we can do it in a movie, works really well. You can do it in a book, those are time-based kinds of things. But what moment in time in sculpture would you pick to get to the idea of this entire kind of, chase? The way that Bernini does it is brilliant. From behind, when you look at this, and all of this composition is set up this way, when you look at it from behind, you can't even see what Apollo's chasing at this point, right? Barely. See something in front of him, maybe, but you see a swirling cape, a chase is ensuing, you're right there along with him, and then as you move around the sculpture, and as I said, I don't have all the angles that will make this work perfectly, more information comes your way. You get up around 3/4 of the back side, you see another figure in front of him. Get a little bit further around, you see him catching up to her. Get a little bit further than that, now he's really catching up to her. And the last view from the front, you see he's right upon her. So moving, let's say, 2 steps ahead of that, you're about 3/4 of the way around. Now you can see what he's chasing. But see, there's still a space here between the two. It doesn't look like he's quite caught her yet. There's some of this glorious close-up work. I mean, really, really great detail. And then when you get around to the front side, look at how all that space is collapsed. And now you see the other hand around her, caught her, and she's basically turning into a tree at this moment in time, right? Pretty brilliant, pretty complex composition, something that takes into account your movement as a viewer around this and helps to activate this, turn this into a narrative that's unfolding. Let's do a compare and contrast here. This is Bernini's David. This is Michelangelo's David. What's different about these two works? Turn to your neighbors and share your thoughts. Right, lots of different multiple viewpoints, walking around this, jutting out into your space, very, very active. I mean, this is a glorious sculpture, right? The Michelangelo, wonderful, beautiful, and so forth, but, completely different animal. The one on the right is basically telling you this guy's going to win because he's in God's image. That's all it's focusing on. It doesn't show you any human effort whatsoever. It's just saying, look at me, I'm godlike, of course I'm going to kick Goliath's ass. Not a problem, right? Over here, though, what have you noticed? What's different about that? Oh, you guys are going to fail your No, I'm joking.
Talking about like there's an emotion. Michelangelo's David is very calm, cocky, and he's determined. He seems to be straining a little bit. There's
Good. So on the left, typical, or your right, typical riposo, right? Very calm, very kind of relaxed in this whole thing. Go over to Bernini's work, though. Human determination, effort. You can see it on his face. He's having to concentrate. He's having to work at this. It's not a done deal. He's got to put in some effort. The bodies, both nice athletic bodies, but let's say that Michelangelo's is a little better. Most women in here, if you're heterosexual, are like, yeah, I wouldn't mind my boyfriend looking like that. Most men are like, yeah, I wouldn't mind looking like that. This one's not bad, but it's not the same thing, right? All this movement, all this dynamism, all that human effort, something that you can relate to, something that's saying, hey, this is a character that's like you in some way. And just like in paintings, these sculptures, you have to remember, were lit in very particular ways that would reflect that kind of very, very high contrast that you get in a lot of the Baroque works, very theatrical. Main work I want you to know for Bernini is this work. This is a work that the entire thing that you're looking at here is part of the work. This is St. Teresa of Avila in Ecstasy. It was commissioned by the Cornaro family, who actually have portraits here on each side in these basically theater boxes. So these are sculptural busts looking out at this scene. All of this is involved in the sculpture. Baroque artists called this the Bel Composto, the beautiful composition, in which, again, drawing upon things that Michelangelo did that we didn't look at here, they're making determinations for everything. All the marble here, all the stucco figures up here, the fresco painting of God the Father, or the Holy Spirit returning everyone to Him, the stained glass window, everything they're making decisions on. We're just going to focus on this, which is a little bit above life-size sculpture. And we have to start with the subject. St. Teresa of Avila was a Counter Reformation mystic out of Spain. She got incredibly popular in Spain, which is one of the reasons that the Catholic Church forgave her mysticism, where she had visions, almost nightly visions, dreams of an angel coming to her and telling her things about God and filling her with a love of God. And she wrote these all out in her diary. She told them to everyone who would listen to her, got her very, very popular. And as I said before, Catholic Church is a little suspicious of mystics, so the fact that they let her off the hook has everything to do with her popularity. When Bernini represents her, what we have are rays of God. These are all bronze rays that have been gilded with gold, coming down into a space and representing one of the subjects that turns up over and over again in her diaries, in her dreams, where an angel, she believes, is coming to her and filling her with a love of God by plunging his arrow or dart into her several times, and on and on and on. Now, the trick to this whole thing is that what we have to get at is how this is represented very specifically, and you can probably see this. It's super touchy-feely. It's very, very sensual. The angel's figure is high sheen marble polish with this very, very light silk kind of, bodice that he's wearing on here, being blown in the wind. These really touchy-feely, again, look like feathered wings and so forth. Whereas the St. Teresa here has a very realistic-looking face, but her body is all absorbed in this incredibly energetic habit that's just about kind of an externalization of her internal emotional state, juxtaposed against these clouds, which are all rough-hewn marble, which is Bernini's little nod to Michelangelo, who is not finishing a lot of those works, right? He just uses that technique to show you the clouds. What I'm getting at is it's a very sensual work about a subject that the artist is trying to make a parallel between St. Teresa's spiritual ecstasy, her being visited by these angels and God, and the closest thing on earth to humans of this time could imagine as her emotional state, which is frankly sexual or orgasmic ecstasy. And they're not really saying, and it's really easy to see this, oh, St. Teresa is probably just having erotic dreams. They may have snickered about that a little bit and kind of joked about it. I know that they did. There's plenty of critics out there that said that. What they're probably more likely doing, though, is saying, listen, we're not mystics. Angels don't visit us. We don't know what it feels like to be filled with the ecstasy of coming into contact with God. The closest thing we can, a parallel would be orgasmic pleasure. And that's certainly played up in this work. So let me read you a passage from her diaries, for instance. I saw in his hands, that's this angel, a large golden dart, and at the end of the iron tip there appeared to be a little fire. It seemed to me that this angel plunged the dart several times into my heart and that it reached deep within me. When he drew it out, I thought that he was carrying off with him the deepest part of me, and he left me all on fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and the sweetness the greatest pain caused me was so superabundant that there is no desire capable of taking it away. Nor is the soul content with less than God. The pain is not bodily but spiritual, although the body doesn't fail to share in some of it, and even a great deal. This loving exchange that takes place between the soul and God is so sweet that I beg him in his goodness to give a taste of this love to anyone who thinks that I'm lying. So you can see how they would make this parallel to some degree, the dart plunging in and out of her, deep inside her, moaning and all of that stuff, and make that kind of parallel. In this work, her face again, is set up in ecstasy, eyes rolled back in her head, mouth open, which, by the way, is very sexually provocative at this time, and all of the energy of what's going on inside her is picked up by these rolling, thick, marble slabs of her habit. This is what it looks like, dramatically shown in situ, where the Coronaro family portraits get to look in on this private moment for all eternity. Does anyone have any questions?